997.1, 997.2, 991.1, 991.2. You've probably heard Porsche owners use the terms .1 and .2 to describe the submodels within a 911 generation. They proudly include the decimal place like it's some sort of badge of honor. But what does it mean and why does it matter? Well, today I'm going to explain why this whole .1 and .2 thing is probably the smartest thing that Porsche has ever done. Maybe besides selling a mass-market SUV to fill their bank accounts, but that's a totally different story. And no, it's not just to extend the life of a particular generation of 911. Most people won't be able to tell the difference between a .1 and a .2 model for any given 911 generation without looking pretty closely. Or if you're a total Porsche fanatic, then obviously you would know. And it wasn't until the 996 generation in 1997 that Porsche implemented this kind of differentiation within the model range. As I'm sure you can guess, the .1 model comes out first, and then a couple of years later, the .2 model is available. But why? What benefit does this possibly have? And in short, the reason is risk management. Let me explain. See, Porsche follows a pretty standard formula for the .1 and the .2. When the .1 comes out, that is a new generation of 911. Effectively, it's a new model in terms of looks and appearance. Anyone would say, okay, that's a new 911. It's a new chassis, a new interior, a new body, new lights, new wheels, all of the things that you would consider to make it a visually new model. And yes, I know what some of you are thinking, well, the 911 design hasn't really changed in 60 years. Okay, yeah, we've heard that before, but trust me, they do change the 911 a little bit over the years. But the thing with the .1 generation is, it actually uses the engine from the previous generation. Sure, they do some slight updates to the engine to fix known issues or to tweak it for a little more horsepower, but it's effectively the same engine that they had been using in the last model of 911. Okay, so new model with old model's engine. Let's look at an example, like the 2012 991.1 that I own. It's actually a 2012 and a half because it was kind of a mid-year release. Side note, if you want to see other videos about that car, like my family road trip, or maybe how the deaths of 3 friends prompted me to buy it, you can check out my channel and please consider subscribing. When the 991.1 came out, it was a new design. It was updated from the 997 styling. It featured a lot more aluminum and less steel, so even though it was physically bigger, it actually weighed about the same as the previous generation. And even though it still looked like a 911, it actually was a new design. But what engine did it come with? The base model came with a 3.6 liter flat 6, and the S model came with a 3.8 liter flat 6. I'm only going to go into the base and S models in this video. Let's look at the engine codes for the 997.2 and the 991.1. So starting in 2009, the 997.2 was using the MA1 engine, which is part of the 9A1 engine series. The 991.1 that replaced it also used the same MA1 engine. And if you really want to nerd out about this stuff, they usually have a decimal after that represents the different revisions and the different displacements that were offered. But then 2016 came along and they introduced the 991.2. With the .2 version of the 991, the body, chassis, and interior were all pretty much the same, aside from a small facelift and some other cosmetic changes on the exterior, which I'm not going to go into in this video. But the engine is what changed dramatically. This was the first introduction of turbochargers on both the base and the S models of the 911 series. So now, effectively, every 911 was a 911 turbo, but they still reserved the turbo name for their top-of-the-line model. This new 3-liter twin-turbo engine was called the MDC, and this is part of the 9A2 series of engines. The engine was a huge departure for Porsche because it added the turbos and it had a smaller displacement at only 3 liters. But the main point that I want to make here is that it happened midway through the life of the 991 chassis, not as an entirely new car. So, what Porsche is doing here is effectively staggering the release of a new chassis and a new engine so they're offset. They never actually release an entirely new car. They release a new chassis, and then a few years later, they put a new engine in that existing chassis. And then they release a new chassis, but keep the engine the same. This reduces the risks because they're never introducing a 100% new car with a new chassis and a new engine at the same time. One of these two major items, the chassis and the engine, is always a proven design that they've refined and worked most of the kinks out of. By doing this, Porsche is not only avoiding potential issues and headaches associated with launching an entirely new car that might be full of problems, but they're also keeping their customers happy. People buy a Porsche not just for the performance, but also because it's a company known for their engineering and quality. And a large part of that quality today is due to their Dot 1 and Dot 2 approach of alternating the release of the chassis and the engine on different timelines. I do want to note here that the GT3 models don't follow this staggered approach of chassis and engine. They do have a Dot 1 and a Dot 2 version of the GT3s, but they use a slightly different strategy. For example, the 991 GT3 did not carry over the Metzger engine from the 997.2 GT3, but the GT3 also doesn't ever debut in the first year of the production of a new chassis either. It always comes a little bit later, like the 991 GT3 didn't come out until 2014, 2 years after the 991 launched in 2012. And I think you remember what happened with the first 991 GT3s too. Engine fires and a total recall of the cars, with all of them receiving new engines. So maybe Porsche should have used the same strategy on the GT3. Maybe they could have avoided that. Anyway, that's it. That's the brilliant strategy of Porsche's Dot 1 and Dot 2 model releases. As a Porsche owner, I've been impressed with how well thought out all of the little details are in the car, like the size of the frunk fitting 2 carry-on sized bags, or the inexpensive and easy to replace front splitter. So I guess I'm not surprised that if they're so thoughtful about the details of the car, they'd also be quite thoughtful about their business strategy too.